Hi. So I turned this piece of cherry about 2.5 years ago, and it's time to finish it. It's dry now. I got it from a viewer who emailed me and said they had a trunk that they wondered if I wanted this piece of cherry. So I brought it home in the truck and I got it out of the truck just by pushing it out. I put a piece of wood on the ground so it wouldn't damage my concrete when I pushed it out. The log can take the drop just fine. But it was sort of this chunk that had some burls on it and it had some sort of straight grain in the middle. And this is the kind of project where you sort of want to start to think about the projects that you want to do as you're cutting it up, as how you cut it up kind of determines what you can do with the wood. So I cut off the burl pieces and I cut the main center of it in half. One of these pieces is the piece that became this bowl. I think it's this first piece that I cut off. If it's not that first piece, then it looks very similar. And once I brought this piece inside, I could then cut it some more on the bandsaw. And I used my circle cutting jig to get it a little closer to round. I sort of used the jig to cut the corners off of the piece and get to something that's a little more round. Now, because this is mostly burl, I thought it would be nice to turn it so that the rim is facing out of the tree, so that the rim is sort of the live edge of the burl. So I mounted it that way on a lathe. I cleaned some of the bark off as it was starting to come off already, and it didn't seem like I was going to be able to save the bark. So I started turning it once it was mounted on the lathe. It was never going to be balanced real well, although it's not a real big piece, so I could turn the speed of the lathe up somewhat. Doing the outside was fairly straightforward. Once I got it round, it was fairly solid. So I shaped the outside and got that to something that I liked. And once I had the outside shaped, I thought it would be a good idea to remount the faceplate on a flatter, more solid surface, as what I had mounted the faceplate to was just the rough chainsaw cut. So I turned a ring into the base, and that worked as a guide to sand the bottom a little bit and get it a little flatter. And I removed a little more bark as it was coming off as I was turning. And I reattached the faceplate. I can reuse the same holes, but now I have a flatter surface for that plate to attach to. And I can start to work on the inside at this point. I think if my memory's right, when I tried to put the tailstock into the workpiece, it was sort of on an angled surface. It wasn't really biting into the workpiece very well. So I drilled a flat spot for the tailstock to attach to. And that helped a little bit. Then I can start to work on the inside, which was a little tricky as it had such a variable rim on the bowl. It meant that for a lot of the beginning of the inside, I was turning air and really only turning about half the workpiece. So it's sort of half solid, half air, which went fine, but it's just, one needs to be really careful, as when you look at the bowl, it doesn't seem very big or very deep. When it's turning, it's as deep as the highest spot on the rim. So you have to reach in beyond that highest spot into the bottom that you're working on. So it's a little bit deceiving in that it's a bigger piece than it looks like when it's not turning, if that makes sense. And once I had it cut to a shape that I could let dry, meaning the walls were thin enough, I could paint it with wax paint and let it dry. I didn't want to get the paint on the live edge or the rim because I wasn't going to be turning that part or sanding it or working it anymore. So I didn't want to get this finish on the rim. So I carefully put the finish only where the piece was turned. But this worked fine. So at this point, it then has dried now for 2.5 years or so, and we can finish it up. So I think what I need to do is reflatten the bottom a little bit as it's warped just a little because it's dried, and then reattach the faceplate. Hopefully I can use the same holes, but we'll see if the whole thing has changed shape enough. I may have to re-drill a few of these, but that's not a big deal. So what I hope is I can reuse the faceplate and only use the faceplate and finish this up just with that and just kind of flatten the bottom in the end. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to hold this on the lathe reversed so the base is sticking out to work on the bottom. So it'd be nice to just finish it just with the faceplate and just can you the way it is. There? Oh yeah, sure. So that's the next step. There you go. I am excited to announce the Maker's Mob annual 72-hour sale, where you can get a full month all-access pass for almost zero cost. For just 99 cents, you can check out the Maker's Mob and see exclusive content from many of YouTube's top makers like John Peters, The Samurai Carpenter, Liam Hoffman, Neil Paskin, John Heitz, and Jimmy DiResta, and myself. If you're watching this before the end of the 72-hour sale, the offer is still available. Simply click the link in the description below, and I'll see you inside the Maker's Mob. Now we can start turning for the second time, now that it's dried. I mounted the piece on the faceplate, and I discovered pretty quickly that it was a little bit off center, as in one side was cutting and one side really wasn't. And I wondered whether I should take it off and remount the faceplate and try and center the piece a little better. I decided not to, as the side that you're cutting on the outside is the side on the inside that you're not cutting. So the inside and the outside sort of even each other out. So all you really need to find is a complete circle of material. So it might seem when you're first starting on a warped, not quite round piece that you're not going to be able to find that circle, when in fact it's there. You just kind of have to trust a little bit that you're going to find it. So my friend Mac, who owns the Panorouter business, came across two pappers, which are the sort of self-enclosed face shield and filtered air system. And he sold me one at a very good price. So I now have a much better system for safety and for breathing air while I'm turning, especially material that's been dried. So this isn't a sponsored video. This isn't something that I got from the company, but it is definitely a big step up from the face shield that I used to use. One thing that I noticed quite quickly with this piece, as it's a live edged rim, is that the bottom sort of half was solid and turned just like a solid piece, and the top half wasn't solid and was very different in turning. So I would tend to treat the top and the bottom halves a little bit different, both on the inside and the outside. With the top half, I couldn't really slice quite the way I wanted to with the bowl gouge. I had to just kind of shove the nose into the material and just take off what I could, which didn't give quite as nice of a surface, but it was the way to do it where there isn't a continuous circle of material. Towards the bottom, where it was solid, I could use the bowl gouge more the way that I like to, which would be using the side of the gouge instead of the tip of the gouge. Once I had the shape about right, I used the scraper. I was a little bit afraid of using the scraper on the rim area. As long as I was really careful, this went just fine. One thing that helped a lot is that I just got a long handle from Carter & Sons Toolworks. That was the one thing that I thought they were missing a little bit from their lineup of tools, was an extra long handle. With the extra long handle, that gave me more control and sort of more leverage with the scraper on the inside. I was able to get a nice finish on both the inside and the outside with the scraper, and both at the solid bottom section of the bowl and the more open rim section of the bowl. Now that I have the rim much thinner, I thought I would try removing more of the bark. And a lot of it was still attached really well. I toyed with the idea of having part of it with bark and part of it without bark, but I decided to just go slowly and carefully and just remove all of the bark. My fear was damaging the actual wood of the piece while trying to remove the bark. Once I had the rim cleaned up and the shape about right, I sanded the piece. Luckily, I got it pretty smooth with the scraper, so I didn't have to do a whole lot of sanding. I discovered pretty quickly, just like in the turning section, that the lower section that was solid, I could use my drill with a piece of sandpaper on it and have the piece spinning on the lathe and sand just like I always do. But the upper section by the rim, I really couldn't do that because I couldn't push hard enough to get the sandpaper to work, because then the drill would bump into the open sections. So what I ended up doing was sanding the lower section with the lathe on and the upper section with the lathe off, and just sort of sanded the sections near the rim with the drill alone. Then I put finish on. Since I wasn't going to turn the piece around, I just left it on the faceplate, and I could put the finish on while it was still mounted on the lathe. So this made it easy to move it and put the finish on without actually touching the surface. Now I can take the faceplate off, and the form is sort of 99% of the way there at this point. So I just want to sand a little bit off the bottom. There's sort of a tiny lip on the bottom, and I just want to get the bottom flat. So it turned out really nice. It was an odd piece of wood, but it made for a nice final form. Thanks for watching. Don't forget about the Maker's Mob link down below. That guy is such a slob.